I think this event, the whole week really, has reminded us that though our contemporary world can often feel like a hostile climate, we live in a city whose name is built around the idea of love and a notion of kinship that is built not on blood, but on the idea that we share a space and live together, and that we can imagine other ways of being together. So I want to start by thanking Jason and his amazing team, Gabe Cantor and Nicole Smith, for bringing us together for this astonishing series of events that we've all been part of. So please just give a round of applause for that. Thank you. I also want to offer special thanks to our hosts here at Lightbox Cinema. This is what Scribe Video Center would call a precious place, and we're grateful to be able to be in this place tonight. In a moment, I'll hand over the mic to my colleague, Professor Ramya Srinivasan. She is an associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania, where she specializes in the early modern Indian history. She's also the interim chair of the South Asia Studies Department. She is best known for her book, The Many Lives of a Rajput Queen, from 2007, as well as for numerous articles that touch on various aspects of the theme of kinship. Our topic this year and our wonderful public program are both the brainchild of her imagination. And so, Ramya, I also want to thank you for sharing your vision and your imagination with us over the course of this year. We're really delighted to have you as topic director. So Professor Srinivasan will introduce both the theme and tonight's speaker in a moment, but before I do that, I need to acknowledge those who have made our program possible. And if you don't already have this program, this is our print program. There's lots of copies around. It gives you the whole program for the year. They take place at many different venues around the city and around the university. And these little red dots on the program cover are inspired by Jason's installation and the red map pins. So every time you look at it, I hope you think about what we've been doing this week. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Department of Anthropology, the Center for Experimental Ethnography, the Cinema and Media Studies Program, the Latin American and Latino Studies Program, the Penn Museum, the Price Lab for Digital Humanities, and the Sachs Program for Arts Innovation. This all sounds very institutional, but behind these programs there are lots and lots of people, and so thank you to all the people who are involved in those programs for your support. The Wolf Humanities Center program is generously sponsored by the Wolf Family Foundation, the Hershey Family Foundation, chocolate, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, no chocolate, and the Office of the Dean of School of Arts and Sciences. I also, especially this week, want to thank our wonderful staff members, Sarah Varney, who is currently on leave but has done a lot for this program, Jennifer Conway, Sarah Malinsky, and our new staff member, Drew Baker, as well as our graduate student assistant this year, Raquel Flasquez. They are always amazing, but this week they have bent over backwards to do all kinds of extraordinary things. And so I'd like to ask them to stand up and just give them a round of applause, please. So let's see, I'm nearly done. If you have questions after the talk, we're going to have an extended question and answer session before the film, but please raise your hand and one of our staff members will bring you a microphone. We record all of our talks to make them available to people beyond Philadelphia and people who couldn't make the event tonight, and we can't hear your question if we don't have the microphone on the recording. This year, as last year, almost all our events will have American Sign Language interpretation, part of our effort to open out the program. So I want to thank the interpreters, Dr. Jamie Fisher and the ASL program in the Department of Linguistics, the Provost Excellence Through Diversity Fund, the Penn Language Center, and the Office of the Dean of School of Arts and Sciences. If you have ideas of how we could make our program more accessible than it is for any communities in the city, please let me know. We care about that a lot, and we will do our best to adapt as we can. We have some very exciting programs coming up in the weeks ahead, the first of which is our Dr. S.T.E. Lee Distinguished Lecture in the Humanities, which will be on October 16th at 5 p.m., where the renowned and award-winning novelist Camilla Shamsi, who is author most recently of the novel Home Fire, as well as many other novels, will be in conversation with the equally renowned Penn professor of classics, Emily Wilson, who, it was announced today, has just been named a 2019 MacArthur Fellow for her recent and brilliant translation of Homer's Odyssey. That the first of our two speakers, our MacArthur Fellows, is a testament to the truly extraordinary nature of the people in this program. I hope you don't get bored with all these geniuses. The word university contains the universe within it. That doesn't mean that we are the world. For me, this has always meant instead that our higher education institutions have to strive to open themselves up to the wider world. That is our mission at the Wolf Center, and I look forward to learning with you and from you this year. So please now join me in welcoming Professor Ramya Srinivasan.
By way of introducing the topic, we always understand kinship to mean many things. It can be biological, adopted, geographical, intellectual, religious, or spiritual. It organizes some of our most significant relationships. It defines our affections, loyalties, and allegiances. However, kinship can also pose intractable obstacles to ways of being individuals and of making community. Today, in many societies around the world, broader understandings of kinship as community are being deliberately erased or forgotten and are being replaced by parochialisms and hatreds. The question that we pose at this year's Humanities Institute Forum on Kinship is the following. How do these current sectarianisms challenge us to remember and reimagine other more progressive forms of kinship and community? It is an honor for me to open this year's forum with a talk by Professor Jason De León, distinguished anthropologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, and recipient of a MacArthur Genius Award, as it is popularly known, in 2014. Professor De León has been involved for many years in the Undocumented Migration Project. He's been tracing, tracking, documenting, and trying to comprehend the clandestine movement of individuals, families, and communities between Latin America and the United States. He uses ethnography, archaeology, visual anthropology, and forensic science to provide testimony and to understand this violent social process. As part of this project, Professor De León has also published a book titled The Land of Open Graves, Living and Dying on the Migrant Trail, that has won almost every major award in the discipline of anthropology in North America. I cannot do better than to cite a tribute from his colleague at UCLA, Philippe Bourgois. Quote, Jason De León confronts us with a vivid indictment of the killing fields on the US-Mexican border and reveals the brutality of global inequality in all its goriness and intimate suffering. A self-described refugee from archaeology, De León is, in fact, revitalizing the field by blowing apart the traditional subdisciplinary boundaries of anthropology. With no holds barred, he offers new paths for theory, methods, and public anthropology, unquote. Professor De León's talk today at the Wolf Humanities Forum is titled Work is Work and is about the human smuggling economy in Latin America.
It's been a real honor and privilege to work with so many members of the UPenn and Philadelphia community. It's been really wonderful. So I want to thank the Wolf Center and everyone that's hosted us. It's been truly wonderful. I am going to have to apologize about something. So my laptop died 3 days ago, and so I was working on this talk at home, and then I needed to finish it today and needed to move some stuff around. And so since I didn't have a laptop, and I used the hotel computer, which apparently did not save any of my changes. So I think I'm okay, but I might have to do a little freestyle here if something pops up, and I'm like, I thought I got rid of that. And part of what has happened this week, over the last week, I was thinking, I was coming here to talk primarily about human smuggling, and after spending a few days here and thinking about the exhibition and the film, I wanted to modify the talk to really contextualize both the film and Hostile Terrain 94, while at the same time making a nod towards the stuff that I'm doing on human smuggling. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I hope that that I can tie all the pieces together, and then we have the Q&A if I have somehow missed something. So I'm just going to start here by telling a little story. It was because of Mitch. They let me in because of Hurricane Mitch. Wizard then sprinkles a bump of shitty cocaine onto the tip of a gold key, and it quickly disappears up his nostrils. Wrists, arms, and trunk contort in a brief narcotic-induced form of cerebral palsy. I fucking love coke, bro. Why the fuck would I ever go to the United States, he says. I make thousands of dollars a month in Mexico. I make more than I ever did selling drugs in the U.S. Nah, viejo, I ain't never going back. He produces a tattered billfold fat with thousands of Mexican pesos. I just sent money back to my family, bro. Look at these Western Union receipts. I got a kid in Honduras. I love him so much, I swear to God, he says. He then kisses an invisible rosary around his neck and points to the heaven. One of his 2 cell phones chirps, an update on another job. His goddamn phones are always making noises. I'm going back to Honduras after this to bring a mother and some kids up here, he says. There's a lot of money in that. And he's not kidding. In the boom and bust world of human smuggling, he's temporarily rolling in the dough. I last saw him in Chiapas, when he barely had enough money to buy beer and weed to keep his crew of enforcers and his cadre of paying clients entertained as they ambled north. They subsisted on iguanas hunted with a slingshot and small periodic payments that families of his charges would wire to him. Tonight, however, there's enough cash to buy beer, coke, and an endless supply of mota, marijuana. I ask about Tiny and Brian, 2 teenage Hondurans whom Wizard was tasked with transporting the 2,000 miles from Chiapas to the northern Mexican border. They weren't alive when Hurricane Mitch touched down in Honduras, but they now find themselves running away from the long-term economic aftermath of the storm and a hail of bullets shot by gangs that now control most of their country. They got picked up by another smuggler who's going to help them, Wizard explains to me. Tiny later tells me a different story. He says, man, my family wired $2,500 to get me across. Wizard said to wait for him in a park while he went to pick up the money, and he never came back. After weeks of camaraderie on the migrant trail, this fictive kinship that develops between migrants and their clients, Wizard pulled a stereotypical fast one. This coyote-client relationship is ultimately about negative reciprocity, no matter how many adventures you share or iguanas you consume together. Tiny and Brian eventually crossed into Arizona with a pack of drug mules. They paid their passage by carrying dope on their back for the American consumer market. Every time a migrant dies from heat or some other environmentally induced death blow along America's southern boundary, a Border Patrol spokesperson steps up to a microphone and spews some public relation nonsense along the lines of, "The Sonora Desert is extremely vast and remote, with very few water sources. It's important to realize that illegal immigrants are being victimized and lied to by smugglers who lead them through treacherous terrain and expose them to extreme conditions." It's like these smugglers just loved going for nature walks. And few of these officials acknowledge that since the mid-1990s, it's the Border Patrol and their policy known as prevention through deterrence that has been purposefully directing people away from urban zones towards remote areas which they deem hostile terrain. The hope is that nature will physically punish these migrants, sometimes to the point of death. The government then blames coyotes for the close to 6 million arrests along the Arizona border and the 3,117 current recovered bodies between 2000 and 2019. It's under this questionable logic that the U.S. also spends millions of dollars each year trying to break up smuggling rings fruitlessly. We rarely pay attention to the direct linkage between security infrastructure and migrant suffering. Blaming nature and blaming smugglers shifts culpability for this crisis away from the federal government that doesn't want to admit that mountains, hyperthermia, western diamondbacks. These are the undocumented employees of the Border Patrol. And this is by no means unique to Arizona. We can only look to places like the Mediterranean Sea to see that global boundary enforcement in the Anthropocene is powered by the labor of many non-humans. 10 years ago, there was little work for people like Wizard. Central Americans could cheaply make their way across Mexico by hopping on La Bestia, the freight train version of that puzzle box from Hellraiser that annihilates many who latch onto it. Things changed, though, in 2014, when America briefly paused to gawk at thousands of unaccompanied minors who suddenly showed up at the Rio Grande Valley, the U.S.-Mexico border. These are kids who are seeking refuge from poverty and unfathomable levels of violence in places that make places like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador contenders for a new suburb in Dante's Seventh Circle. However, within a few months, these scenes of human jetsam disappeared. With support from the United States, Mexico launched Plan Frontera Sur, a program aimed at controlling undocumented migration across Mexico. And Border South, the title Border South, is a reference to Plan Frontera Sur, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But the unstated goal under the Obama administration was to make Mexico unpassable. And ironically now, in this current era, and even under Obama, Mexico deports more Central Americans than we do. But keep in mind that changes in these American border policies, they keep people like Wizard swimming in Mexican pesos and Colombian cocaine. The people whose movement Wizard profits from, those are folks who are running from the lingering economic, social, and political damage that things like hurricanes have set folks adrift in places like Honduras in 1998. This environmental catastrophe has pushed them from their homes, and the U.S. federal government will use the increasingly hot Sonora Desert to stop them dead in their tracks. So this guarantees steady work for the wizards of the world. The smuggler is not a simple villain that he's often portrayed to be, he or she. The smuggler and the cultural and human baggage that he carries is a direct and expected product of the political economy, of sovereignty, and the growing climatic nightmare that is the Anthropocene. And somewhere right now, a cell phone is ringing, both in some safe house and here. And so I initially wanted to come here and talk about people like Wizard and other smugglers that I've been close with for the last 4 years, trying to understand the relationships that these folks have with their clients, with each other, and the way in which things like organized crime, MS-13, the role that these criminal organizations play in the human smuggling industry. But then once I kind of got into thinking about this exhibition and the way in which it connects to the film, I felt like I needed to give you some additional information, and I really wanted to figure out ways to think about kinship in the Arizona desert. Across Mexico. You're going to watch the film Border South, which much of it is about the relationships amongst migrants, between migrants and humanitarian workers who they're trying to help. It highlights the kinship, I think, that develops between the anthropologist and the people that she or he work with, and so. And I had never really been asked to explicitly talk about kinship, but once I started thinking about it, it was like, man, undocumented migration is inherently about kinship. The whole thing. People are migrating for their family. People are seeking to reunite with loved ones. After the deporter-in-chief, Obama, deported hundreds of thousands of people, you've got a new stream of folks coming across the U.S.-Mexico border to reunite with their family and go back to the only place that they've ever called home. You've also got people finding kinship on the migrant trail. Desperate people and their families doing desperate things. But you can also think about it today as people losing loved ones to migration. and the destruction, the global inequality, global economic inequalities, the effects of climate change, and brutal immigration policies have on family structures. And so I would argue that you can't understand human smuggling, you can't understand what's going on in Mexico right now, I think, without also really understanding what's been happening in Arizona for about 20 years. And so I'm going to shift my talk today to give you some insights into the Arizona crisis, which is both referenced in the film and in the exhibition, so that you can better understand both of those things and see how the dots all connect. And so first, as I mentioned, you're going to watch a film tonight about Plan Frontera Sur, which started in 2014, and really was an Obama-era policy that Donald Trump has now taken on to be his own and has really been using in all kinds of ways. So all the things that we're doing now, making people wait in Mexico to apply for asylum, the political pressure on Mexico and El Salvador and Honduras to stop people from migrating, those are all things that Obama was also doing, and now Trump has just really ramped them up. And obviously, much of this began as a response to the events that happened in 2014 with that first wave of child migrants. And so it starts in 2014, Plan Frontera Sur, and it really was about the U.S. saying to Mexico that we need to ramp up security. You need to stop these kids from crossing the country, and it was labeled as a human rights issue, that Mexico was there to protect the human rights of migrants, which, if you've spent any time on the migrant trail in Mexico, you know is utter nonsense. This program that was developed under political and economic pressure from the U.S. was really about brutalizing these migrants. And overnight, you see Mexican immigration enforcement start to look a lot like what's going on in places like southern Arizona. So dozens of temporary checkpoints pop up, detention centers. Mexico now is investing in its own infrastructure for their deportation industrial machine, and really just deporting people in hundreds of thousands of people. And also leading to a major spike in human rights violations at the hands of government officials, including Mexican immigration enforcement, as well as human smugglers and criminal organizations now who are trying to capitalize on this policy. So Mexico is really starting to look quite a bit like southern Arizona. And the idea really has been to see if we can use Mexico as a second border. Can we move the U.S.-Mexico border down to Guatemala and stop people before they can get across the country? And that's really a big chunk of what Border South is about, is how Mexico has evolved to deal with this rise in people moving across that country. But I would argue that you can't start there. You have to, I think, start in Arizona and sort of work your way back. And the film does that a bit, and that's what I'm going to kind of do today to give you some context for understanding what you're going to see. And so I'm going to just give us a little bit of architecture here, so we can see where I'm taking this. I'm talking about two different book projects today. One is this ongoing project about smugglers, and the other is my first book, The Land of Open Graves, which was really about migrants in Arizona. And I want to give you some background about what's been happening in Arizona, this policy of prevention through deterrence. And then I want to tell some stories that are about death, but I think are also deeply about kinship. And if you can take away anything from this talk, it's two things. It's one, that the desert is a massive border wall that we've been using for a long time, and that's what Hostile Terrain 94 really is about, is to show the impacts that this policy has on the lives of millions of people. And the second thing, and this is my point here, we're changing, I'm not going to, was really that these deaths are violent, but also they're incredibly damaging to family structure. I mean, you want to think of the relationships amongst people are destroyed by border policies. And so when we frame this as a kinship issue, it really brings out the pain and suffering that things like prevention through deterrence wreak on the family structure. And as was mentioned, the work that I'm talking about today comes from the Undocumented Migration Project, which is a long-term endeavor that I've been directing since 2009. And it really is a combination of things. I freely steal from pretty much anywhere to make a point or to try to understand an issue. So whether that's ethnography, archaeology, forensic science, visual arts, where I'm actively looking for things that can help me to better understand this process. And so I'm going to jump around a little bit methodologically here to talk about some of these issues. But before we can do that, and before we can kind of end at thinking about Plan Frontera Sur, the southern, the Mexican experience that Central American migrants are having, I think we have to go back a couple of decades and start in the mid 1990s. You may or may not know that in the up till the mid 90s, border crossings were oftentimes very visible. So you could go to downtown El Paso at dusk, and you could see hundreds of people waiting on the other side of the fence for the sun to go down, and then they would hop the wall and run into town and hide. And the Border Patrol would try to arrest as many people as they could, but they would miss a lot of folks, and people would end up blending in with the crowd. This was politically unpopular. We could think about the mid-'90s as being a really terrible time to be Latinx in places like Southern California. So you've got lots of politicians who are using the trope of the migrant to justify new expenditures, to ramp up the anti-immigrant rhetoric, to make calls for tougher border security. It feels familiar. So that's kind of going on in the mid-1990s, and the Border Patrol decides that they're going to try to force people away from these urban ports of entry and push them out into places where they will be easier to catch, in this case, the Sonora Desert of Arizona. And this is where this policy of prevention through deterrence comes out. And apparently, I haven't seen it yet, but someone just texted me and said that that he who can't be named, number 45, I think I've already named him though. Apparently today in a press conference that just happened right now, he references prevention through deterrence. Doesn't actually say the phrase, but talks about the way in which the environment has been used by the Border Patrol, which I think is a stunning admission for an administration that has been pushing this ridiculous border wall idea for so long, to now recognize that, hey, we've been doing this other thing that's brutal for many years. But prevention through deterrence is an official policy that was put in place in 1994, and it's super simple. And these are just quotes from a Border Patrol policy document where they say, look, the border line, the place where we can't build a wall because there's too many mountains and rushing rivers and rugged terrain, we could use that to our advantage. These are places that are natural barriers to movement. And so the thinking was, if we can get people away from downtown El Paso by putting a bunch of vehicles there and helicopters and motion sensors, we can send them out to these more difficult landscapes where people would find themselves in, quote, mortal danger. And in this quote here, if you disrupt these traditional routes, people will be forced over, quote, more hostile terrain, which is where we get our exhibition title from. And so the idea is, let's leave the back door open of places like southern Arizona where people can be easily caught. And that's what we have done. 6 million people have been arrested since 2000 coming through this little patch of land in southern Arizona. We've left this back door open. And if you go down to the border, this is the border wall just west of the town of Nogales. It goes for about 3 or 4 miles in each direction and then stops. And you can literally just walk around it. This is because it's incredibly difficult to maintain a physical wall in this environment because of flooding, because of the rugged terrain. It's prohibitively expensive, and we know that you don't have enough people to guard this. So people can hop over it, crawl underneath it. But more importantly, leaving this open space, make it look like this, is the idea that if you have to walk 6 days across a landscape where you can die of dehydration, freeze to death in the winter, get stung by rattlesnakes, break a leg in the middle of nowhere, that those things will stop people. And so that's been the idea, and that is the current thinking about this policy. This policy went into place in 1994, and it was recognized that it was going to lead to some fatalities, that hostile terrain was going to equal migrant death. And right around the time that this policy goes into effect is when we crashed the Mexican economy with NAFTA. And so now suddenly millions of people can't afford to make a living farming in Mexico, so they have to flee to the United States to work, coinciding with this policy. And there's a direct positive correlation between prevention through deterrence and migrant death. It's one that's been acknowledged over and over by the federal government. And, over 3,000 bodies have been recovered, and I'm going to argue today that that's a low number. You may or may not have visited the hostile terrain exhibition or helped us to fill out those tags, but I just want to show you. This is a graphic from the data from the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office that tracks migrant death that we have been using for this exhibition, and we've tried to take these little red dots that represent the deaths of people and convert them into something more real, more tangible. We've asked volunteers to come and to stand in solidarity with migrants and help us memorialize these folks for a little bit by filling out handwritten toe tags with their information. And so that's what we've done this week. Over 400 people were over in the Penn Museum helping us to build this exhibition and to look like something like this. This is actually from our Lancaster show we had in January. I didn't have time to upload the new version, but the one that's here is enormous. It's the biggest one we've ever done, and it's I would highly recommend checking out it if you haven't. But this is prevention through deterrence. This is what it does, and part of our goal is to raise awareness about that. If you want more information about the exhibition, you can check out our website. We're going to do this in 150 locations next year between May and October, with the final show being just a few blocks from the White House, and as an attempt to engage with different communities in some meaningful kind of way, while at the same time raising awareness about this very troubling issue. And just to give you some numbers here, federal government's known for a long time that this is going to kill people. That at one point they recognized that a metric that they could use to measure the efficacy of this policy was an increase in migrant death. We hide that information now, but in the beginning they knew you put this in place, a lot of people are going to die, and hopefully they'll stop coming. But that, of course, has not happened. Deaths have gone. Even as migration has slowed down, its deaths have gone up. And so, just something to be thinking about as we hear about those who have lost their lives. I just wanted to give you a quick sense of what it looks like to be in this environment. This is Memo and Lucho. These are two men that I got to know many years ago, whose stories I followed from Mexico through the Arizona desert and then into southern Arizona. And on their final crossing trip, they photographed their journey with disposable cameras and have allowed me to use those images. I'll give you just a quick little geography lesson here. So hostile terrain, the exhibition, and much of what we filmed for Border South in Arizona takes place in and around the town of Arivaca, which is just southwest of Tucson, and which for many years was the primary crossing corridor for migrants. Memo and Lucho would tell you if you want to cross the U.S.-Mexico border, you start in a town called Altar. That's where you go to meet your smuggler. It's a town that revolves almost completely around drug and human smuggling, to the point that the local baseball team are called the Coyotes of Altar. So it's a reference to the human smuggler. It's a really fascinating and kind of terrifying place, but it's where many migrants start their journey. They go there to meet up with their smuggler, who then drives them in a bus up to the U.S.-Mexico border, where then people will enter the desert. If you're in Altar, you got to do some shopping. The industry there revolves completely around camouflage clothes, hiking boots, first aid equipment, high salt content foods, all the things that a migrant would need to survive the desert. And we've spent many years thinking about the relationship between materiality and human smuggling. You'll need all that stuff because you're going to walk out in the desert. It used to be a 2 or 3 day walk through a flat area, and now it looks more like a 7 to 10 day walk through the mountains as people are getting squeezed into more and more dangerous places with extreme temperatures and average temperatures in the hundreds during the summer. It is rugged terrain. I mean, truly. It's a beautiful landscape, but if you're someone like me who would rather be drinking beer, eating gummy bears, and watching Law and Order, it's like I'm not prepared to be out there. And so if you're a migrant and you're wearing Converse and you're carrying a gallon of water, I mean, it's a really brutal place. I've gotten into a lot of trouble hiking, despite the fact that I'm wearing overpriced boots, carrying 5 gallons of water, have a GPS unit. You can be prepared and still get into trouble very quickly. You can deal with things like total darkness. You're traveling without a compass, without a map, and with no lights. So you're using the stars to navigate, and you're hoping that there's enough sunlight, enough moonlight to allow you to see where you're going. It's a place where nature seems to be experimenting with different ways to bite you, scratch you, inject you with poison. There's all kinds of creatures out there that can get you in trouble really, really quickly. Memo and Lucho would tell you that no matter how hard you prepare for your journey, you just never know what's going to happen. It's, like you're hiking in the summer and you forget that, hey, you get monsoons in Arizona, so you can actually drown in one of these deep canyons. This is a picture of them in the middle of this journey that happened during the monsoon season in Arizona. They went from having no water to drink to almost drowning in a wash. And when I teach field methods to my students, to undergrads, and they ask me, how do you know when you've developed good rapport with people? And I say, it's like, I think it's oftentimes when they go out on a limb for you and really help to facilitate the work. And I think I don't know if I would call it funny, but I'm deeply appreciative of the fact that these two men are in the midst of an incredibly dangerous journey, and they stop in the middle of it and they go, you know who would love a picture of this? Jason would really like a picture of this. So I'm always deeply grateful of these guys. And Memo actually tells me another story. He's like, after this, he's like, I was trying to take a picture of something, and a flash went off, and then Border Patrol saw us, and we had to run. And I'm like, oh, God, like, what am I doing? So, these guys, I'm really just grateful for all of their willingness to share these stories. And they would tell you that this stuff will kill you. I mean, people, the lasting effects of exposure to this environment are real. I know many migrants, including these guys, who have permanent health damage from being completely dehydrated in the desert, from almost dying for lack of water. And on this particular journey, Memo actually did almost die because of both the lack of water and early onset diabetes. And so, if you don't know that you have a pre-existing medical condition, this is oftentimes the moment when you figure that out. So, I mean, it is brutal. I'm going to skip ahead here. But I want to. I wanted to give you a little sense of, there are thousands of people on the hostile terrain map, but millions of people like Memo and Lucho and others, men, women, children, family groups, have gone through this process. And I wanted to use the second half of this talk to talk about these folks who haven't made it. And so I'm going to tell a story here. The Norwegian explorer Karl Lumholtz, he once wrote that the summer desert heat in Sonora felt like you were, quote, walking between great fires. I'd be like, that's not even approaching how it feels. Because in this moment, and hiking in the desert, it feels like I'm walking right through flames. It's easily over 100 degrees, and it's only 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm climbing through the Tumacacari Mountains with my friend Bob Key, a member of the Southern Arizona humanitarian group, the Tucson Samaritans. He's been out here for years, leaving water for unseen migrants and occasionally giving first aid to abandoned souls that he comes across. The path that we're on is full of all kinds of sharp-angled rocks and these mesquite trees that just keep seeming to come at you and want to poke your eyes out. And Bob says to me, "We're almost there." And I try to smile when Bob says this to me, because almost there is a bullshit line from Bob, because it's always like 6 more miles uphill. So he lies to me to make me feel better. But on this particular day that I'm with Bob, there's a difference in his voice. He's not being his normal jovial self. He's not joking around, which normally involves him telling me that he can carry me on his back if he wants, or hold my pack. And Bob is 35 years older than me. He's just a superhuman being. On this particular day, he's not giving me a hard time, because it's clear that he's on some kind of a mission. We turn a corner and we stop, and he says to me, "This is the spot where we found the person. I called the sheriff and they came out to pick up what they could find, but it was dark and they didn't have a lot of time to go over the area." He says, "It was mostly arm and leg bones and some pieces of clothing. I want to see if I can find the head," he says to me. "That would make it easier to identify the person. I know there's still bones out here." And he's right. There are a lot of bones that the police overlooked, but we have to cover quite a bit of ground before we start to find them. And then it becomes very unsettling. There are pieces everywhere. I walk downhill off the trail, and I see a articulated arm missing flesh that's wedged between 2 rocks, a human arm sticking out of the ground. It's been picked clean by some unknown creature. I start walking up, pick that up, put it in a bag. I walk up the trail, keep looking, and I'm squinting because it looks like someone has sprinkled blackboard chalk on the ground. And I get closer, and I realize that that's not chalk. Those are splinters of human bone. And it's mostly sun-bleached rib fragments that have been cracked and gnawed by some long-gone animal. And then just up off the trail, I spot a complete or semi-complete human tooth. And this gives us hope that the skull is nearby. So we start desperately looking for this person's skull. We're turning over rocks. I'm sticking my hand in nests, subterranean holes, trying to find bones that might have been squirreled away by an animal or moved by monsoon waters. Everyone moves at a desperate pace for almost an hour. But we give up. We find no skull. We do come across, though, a pair of worn-out hiking boots in close proximity to these bones. Are these the shoes of a dead person? Where the hell is the skull? I ask myself. Where? And then I start imagining what could have happened to this person's head. I have this montage of vultures that I can see. They're laughing as they're ripping this person's eyeballs out of the sockets. I hallucinate 2 coyotes batting around a skull so that they can access brain matter through the foramen magnum, the hole at the base of the skull. It's these moments that I think you can start to despise the human imagination. And people that I've talked to who have lost loved ones in the desert, they will tell you that it's not knowing what happened to them coupled with these moments of grotesque possibility. It's like, that is what drives you insane. We start to walk away, dejected because we have found no skull. And I see something on the ground. And I go and I pick it up. And it's a piece of bone smaller than my fingernail. It immediately starts turning to dust. I try to hand this to Bob, like, stick this in the bag, and it just blows off these things just turn to dust and blow off my fingertips. So I scrape what I can of this person off of my hand into this bag. But I'm like, what am I doing? This is an absolutely futile gesture. You can't do shit with bone dust. There's nothing you can do with this stuff. This person has been reduced to nothing, to bone dust, and you can see them on that wall, that hostile terrain 94, the 1,100 or so orange toe tags represent the bodies of unidentified individuals. And this person whose arm we found and this tooth and this piece of dust, they're in some database that you can access online now that just says name unknown, country of origin unknown, age unknown, sex unknown, cause of death, it says undetermined, partial skeletal remains, but it really should say cause of death, prevention through deterrence, because this is what it looks like. This person has been swallowed up by the desert, and there were no witnesses. And so that troubles me deeply. And I've been trying to understand how the decomposition that these bodies experience can be connected to politics and to policy. And I wasn't going to go into a deep discussion about taphonomy today, but obviously some of my slides still want me to do that. But when I talk about taphonomy, all I mean is decomposition. So it's the things that happen to a body, whether they're biological or cultural, whether a body is consumed by insects or cremated by humans. Those are what we would call taphonomic processes. But you could think about them in general as decomposition processes. I've been very interested in that for a long time and trying to understand how that connects up to prevention through deterrence. And thousands have died in Arizona. Thousands have died in Texas. We just don't know. We don't have a good sense of just how many, but I can tell you it's for sure thousands. And when we started this project in 2009, there was a whole lot of speculation about what was going on in the desert. Nobody could tell me with any kind of assurance how bodies decompose. Do they mummify? Do they get eaten by animals? How long does that take? Nobody knew. But there was lots of speculation about it. And so in order to answer this question that I was having, what happens to a body out there, and are our numbers good, or are many more people dying that we just haven't been able to find because they've been consumed by the desert? I became very interested in the ways in which decomposition occurs. And just as a warning here, you're going to see some images that are slightly difficult to look at that involve animals. And so I just want to give you a quick warning here. Previous research on decomposition in the United States and elsewhere heavily relies on animals, and particularly pigs. Pigs are the closest proxy to the human body animal that we know. Similar organ distribution, similar weight, skin type, hair. There's many things that are close to what humans look like, that allows us to then use pigs as proxies for humans. So we've been shooting them to do ballistic tests. We've been blowing them up. I once had a conversation with FBI agents in Michigan about how they use pigs to see what suicide bombings look like. So they put explosive vests on these animals and blow them up, and then go and trace where those materials go. So I got interested in seeing whether or not we could do that with in the Arizona desert, and so I'm going to show you some pictures here of animals that have been killed on site as part of this project and have been used in these experiments. I'm completely happy to talk about the ethics of this in the Q&A, and this is something that I've always wanted that I always address kind of head on. I won't get into it now, but if that's a question of interest, I'm happy to talk about the ethical decisions that underlie this, because here I am arguing against a form of violence that I find morally reprehensible, and at the same time, I'm perpetuating violence against these animals in the name of science. So it's not something that I do lightly, and I'm happy to discuss that more. So we decided, after taking a crash course in forensics, that pigs could be used for this process, which is what I started doing. And so animals were killed on site by a professional animal handler They were dressed in clothes that we would expect migrants to wear, so blue jeans, sneakers. We give them personal effects, a backpack, all these kinds of things. And then we put them in different contexts, direct sunlight, shade. We covered some with rocks, and we monitored these animals for 6 weeks with motion sensor cameras because I wanted to see what exactly happens to these bodies. And I'll just give you a quick look at what happens. So this animal has been dead for about 3 days. When we ran this experiment, the little literature that existed about decomp in this area referenced only coyotes and bears as possible scavengers, and 95% of the scavenging that we observed in this context were vultures. These animals arrive quickly and destroy these bodies in a matter of hours. And I could talk more about that data in the Q&A. We've been doing this off and on for 4 years. We ran experiments in the summer of 2018, we had a whole bunch of different experiments that we were running, but I wanted to show you this animal had been dead for maybe a few hours here, and then this is a couple of days later. And we had USA Today come out and do a story on this, and they were taking pictures of this, and the reporter said to me, "Man, you guys really staged this thing in a super creepy way." And I said, "You think that I didn't touch that? That's exactly what it looked like. The shoes and the head, everything else is gone." I was like, I couldn't, number one, I wouldn't do that, but number two, you don't need to stage this stuff. I mean, it is horrible and shocking all on its own. So this is what got us worried. Okay, if this is what's happening, then these thousands of bodies on this wall don't represent then the actual number of folks who are dying, because we're seeing people die at such high numbers, disappear in such a rapid time. And so there were all kinds of implications about this. Incredibly fast rate of decomposition. The dispersal of bones and personal effects was shocking. So in some cases, you couldn't even find the personal effects anymore, which are often crucial to identifying a body. And we had a bunch of different other results, like migrants have been telling me that they cover up bodies with rocks to protect them when people die. The body that we cover with rocks was consumed in under 36 hours, much faster than the ones that were left out in direct sunlight, because we had all forgotten that rocks conduct heat. And so when you cover a body as a way to protect it from nature, it actually ends up cooking that body much quicker. And vultures just got in there at a much faster rate. And so, of course, there are many political implications about this type of death. But I want to just give you, I want to contextualize this more and maybe personalize it more. Right after we started these experiments, this particular event happened. I'll tell another story. The 8 of us stand around her in silent awe. And it's obvious that not all of my students have ever seen a corpse before, because someone asks me if she's really dead. She's lying face down in the dirt, and it appears that she perished while attempting to get up the hill. To get to this location, she easily walked over 40 miles and had to come through the Tumacacori Mountains. Rigor mortis has set in, and her fingers have started to curl. The back of her pants are stained with excrement and bubbling with copper-colored fluids that have been expelled from her body upon death. She's been dead only a few days, but is in what forensic anthropologists would call early decomposition. Gray to green discoloration, some flesh relatively fresh, bloating, brown black discoloration of the arms and legs. But these descriptions don't do justice to what bodies left out in the desert look like, smell like, or sound like. Nothing does. Against the quiet backdrop of the desert, you can hear the buzzing of flies laying eggs on her. There's also a steady hissing of intestinal gas that's escaping from her bloated body. After several days in this desert, her flesh has begun to change. It's blackened, it's mummifying, and the bloating is starting to really obscure her physical features. While parts of her are starting to transform into these unfamiliar shapes and colors, her striking jet black hair and the ponytail holder wrapped around her wrist, these hint at the person that she once was. I ask a student to get out a blanket, and we cover her up. It makes those of us still alive feel better. But high above us, these turkey vultures continue to circle. And I want to say something to my students that I'm with. I want to somehow make this death seem dignified or peaceful. But it's a ridiculous thought. There's nothing you can say in this scenario that doesn't sound contrived. And months later, after this happens, and I show that previous image, someone will say, hey, these photos are robbing this person of their dignity. And then I will say, well, the types of deaths that migrants experience, they're not intended to be dignified. These are intended to be brutal, cruel sorts of deaths. That's what prevention through deterrence looks like. And we should be really uncomfortable because this is us. This is America. We do this. These corpses right now lay on a desert floor rotting, and there just aren't enough witnesses. And you can see Maricela. She's on that toe tag wall. She's the one tag that I fill out. She's my connection to this whole thing, I think. And we sit with her for hours on this particular day. And finally, all I can say to my students is at least we got to her before the vultures did. Cuenca, Ecuador. That woman's name, as you saw, was Carmita Maricela Zaguipuyas. And she was a 31-year-old mother of 3 who decided to leave her husband and children in Ecuador in June of 2012 to make it to the United States. She was abandoned by her smuggler when she became ill. She likely died from a combination of hyperthermia and a pre-existing medical condition. But one of the last things Maricela said to her family was, my kids are dying of hunger here in Ecuador, and so I must go. My kids are suffering, so whatever my destiny is, I must go. After finding her body, I made contact with her family in New York and in Ecuador. And one of the questions that they constantly asked was about the condition of her body. Maricela's sister-in-law, Cristina, told me in 2014 about her return home. And she said Maricela was brought back, and they said, don't open the coffin. Her body's not in good shape. She had been lying unembalmed for 3 weeks after being in the desert for 4 or 5 days. And by the time she got back to Ecuador, she was a mess. And Cristina says that there were real doubts that it was her. They said, don't open the coffin, but of course we opened the coffin. I wanted to change her clothes for the funeral, but her face was a mess, and there were no hands. The medical examiner did not want to tell the family that they had to remove her hands and rehydrate them in saline to take her fingerprints because it was so damaged. But the family needed to see, and so when I got there, they wanted to see photos of her body, and they wanted to see them quickly. And so I brought them many photos. And Cristina says to me, if this is her buried here, well, thank God. At least we can go see her. She's half complete, but at least she came back. And it will help us to move forward. But then she says, I don't think it's really her. It was hard to see her in that form and hard to believe that that's what she looks like now. And of course, the kids saw her too in this condition. her 3 children who needed to say goodbye to their mother were inconsolable and deeply traumatized by opening that coffin in an attempt to find some closure. And I would argue that that the violence that these bodies experience in the deserts are traumatizing. But people can try to move on if they have a body to mourn over, if they have a coffin to put into the ground. But not everybody is that lucky. Clinical psychologist Pauline Boss, who has written about the children of disappeared Vietnam vets and the children of 9/11 victims whose bodies were never recovered, talks about this idea of ambiguous loss, a loss that is never resolvable. People don't know if their loved ones are alive or dead because they've disappeared. And she argues that this freezes the grieving process. It makes it impossible for these folks to move on with their lives. And for me, that is the most cruel part of prevention through deterrence. The many people who have disappeared and never been recovered in the desert, whose families are wondering what happened to them, or the 1,100, 1,200 unidentified bodies that are on that wall that have not been returned home yet. People don't know that is their loved one up there on that toe tag. For me, that's the hardest part of this whole thing. And I thought after Maricela's story that things couldn't get worse, that there was nothing left to do that could make one feel so desperate and depressed about this whole thing. But of course, I think we humans are very good at inflicting harm upon one another in all kinds of ways, and prevention through deterrence is just one of them. But it's one that is just sometimes I don't have the words for it. But I thought this whole thing was over for me, and I was sitting in the Tucson airport about 362 days after we found Maricela's body. I had just come back from the field, was getting ready to go home, when Christina sends me a message on Facebook and says, "Can we call you right now? We need help. We have a relative who has gone missing." And so I became involved with another story, except this time it's for the missing. And so they asked me to meet with the family that was in New York. And so I went and did some interviews with them to try to help them piece together this story. And one of the things I did was I interviewed a 13-year-old kid who had just come from the Sonora Desert, who had been there with this relative who had gone missing. And this is what this kid says to me. He says, "We were in the desert for 5 days when the water ran out." He says, "Jose," that's the kid's name who disappeared, he kept stopping to sit and drink water. But many people were being left behind. It was just exhausting. And he says, "We got to a hill at about 6 o'clock in the morning, and Jose fell down. His legs gave out, and he just slumped on the ground. And the smuggler, the coyote, he began kicking this kid and saying, 'You better get up, or I'm going to beat you.' And Jose said, okay, but he couldn't do it." He says he was sitting on the ground looking all dazed. Well, we didn't know what to do. We were just kids ourselves. So we gave him a bottle of water, and we went to get help. And then we were arrested by the Border Patrol 2 days later. The kid that they left behind was a 15-year-old named Jose Maria Takuri. And the interviews that I've done with his parents, they're constantly trying to explain how this has come to be, why their kid was out in the desert. And so this is an interview with Jose's dad that took place in Long Island about a year after he disappeared. And he's talking about his son, Jose. He says, "When we were in Ecuador, in Cuenca, my son was my right hand. He was always with me. We were inseparable. But when I came to this country, to the United States, he became unruly, rebellious. And I would call him up and say, 'Jose, why have you changed? Why have you become such a bad kid? You're running around, you're drinking, you're smoking. He's just being watched by an elderly grandmother who can't keep track of this wily teenager. And his kid says to him, no, Papi, it's your fault. You left me. We were like brothers. You were my everything, and then you left me. It's your fault that I'm like this, he says. And his dad says, look, I didn't come to New York because I don't love you. I didn't come to New York because I wanted to. I came to New York to get ahead, to give you what you need. He says, I left when my son was, my wife and I left when my son was 10. But he didn't understand these things. I kept asking him why he was acting up, why he had changed from being such a good kid. But all he would say was that he needed to come to New York. He had everything there except us. And he would blame my wife and I and say it was our fault for leaving him, that he himself felt empty inside, that he would go home and we wouldn't be there. And so his son told him, look, I want to be with you guys so that I can fill this emptiness inside of me. And so they agreed that Jose would come, that he would reunite with his parents. His dad says he called me in May of 2013, right before he went into the desert. And the last time I spoke to my son, he said, Papi, I need to talk to you. And his dad says, well, okay, let's talk. And he says, no, not like this. I want to talk face to face, father and son. It had been 5 years since they had stood face to face. And so he says, okay, that's fine. Something is bothering you, but we'll talk about it when you get here. Then we'll talk. And his dad says, he never told me what he wanted to talk about. But I guess he met a girl in Ecuador, and they'd gone out for about 6 months. And they were together before he left. And she got pregnant. I guess this is what he wanted to tell me, that his girlfriend was pregnant, and would I help him? Five months after Jose disappeared, Maria Jose was born in Cuenca, Ecuador. And his dad says to me, I never was able to tell my son that I was going to support him and his daughter, that I was going to do everything, and I was never going to abandon her. And he says, this is the remorse that I have, that I could never tell my son face to face that I was going to support him, that I would convince him of that. And then he says, his girlfriend calls every day to see if we have some news. But we have no news. We don't know what to do. We can't go down to the U.S.-Mexico border to look for him. We have no papers. We're trying to find any information, but we just don't. We just don't have any. He says, there's nothing that we can do to get back that joy we have lost until we find him, to know something about what has happened. And Jose may be on that wall. He may be one of those orange tags. I don't know. We're trying to figure that out, but we have no idea. And then his dad says to me, he says, it feels like I'm losing the battle some days. And I tell myself, I'm going to energize myself, and I say, we're going to find him. But it's difficult to live like this, to know nothing. And then he looks at me and he says, I just pray to God that someday we'll be reunited with Jose in some form or another. Thank you.
So many people were willing to risk their lives for the story that you told, had so much pain and anguish. I'm just wondering, how do we keep them in their homes where that they were trying to leave, make things safer for them, as opposed to the risk that they had to take to leave their dangerous countries and come to America? I just wonder if we were able to change their situations that they were leaving from. I mean, I'm not sure if that's an appropriate question or not, but it's something that I wonder about.
I think that's a great question. I think hit the nail on the head. When we talk about comprehensive immigration reform, we seem to be talking about border security. We seem to be talking about helping to legalize people who are already here, but rarely do people talk about the economic and political stability that's needed in places like Latin America so that people don't have to migrate. I think that's a crucial part of this whole equation, and it's one that policymakers on the left and the right fail to recognize. I remember once I was asked by a foreign journalist what would be comprehensive immigration reform for me, and I said, well, I'm an anthropologist, so you're not going to like my overly complicated answer. The world's a complicated place. There's a million moving pieces. So I said, I'll make it simple for you. Let's start with stop with the meddling in Central America, the political interventions in places like Honduras, and El Salvador, and Guatemala. Stop that. Let's stop working to undermine Mexico's economy so that people can stay instead of having to migrate. And this person, let's stop snorting all the cocaine that comes through Mexico and sending guns to Mexico. And then this person said to me, but don't you think that the narco war in Mexico is Mexico's problem? Smith & Wesson is not making assault rifles in Mexico, right? This is an American-created problem that we have to recognize. And so for me, making these places safer for people is crucial. Because no matter what we do, we can legalize everybody that's here, and that would be a wonderful thing. But it's not going to help these folks who have to migrate because their lives are in danger. All of the talk about cutting foreign aid to Honduras and Guatemala as a threat to stop this migration flow is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're just making the situation worse. And people just don't really want to understand that. And so I think that the American public, a major step for us to get towards immigration reform is a recognition of the way in which U.S. policies abroad impact people's need to leave their homes. Thank you for that.
I'm wondering, you didn't talk much about the war that Ronald Reagan waged against El Salvador and Nicaragua in the 80s with his Contras. I'd like to know if you feel that that situation caused human rights to erode a lot in Central America, and that it also gave the gangs and the human smugglers a big, impetus to get more active. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This problem is an old problem, and the things that we've done in Central America over the decades have all created this current problem now, whether that's the corruption or the military violence, the human rights violations. I think you can trace a lot of those things back to the 80s and back even farther than that. We know that MS-13 is a problem that came out of Los Angeles, came out of folks who had fled Central America. We had made that country unlivable because of the support of these death squads that had forced folks to leave, put them into a precarious situation in Los Angeles where gangs began to develop as a defense mechanism because you've got all these marginalized communities. You've got folks that have been around a lot of violence for a long time who then now have to fend for themselves. And then these gang problems develop, and then we deport them back to this home country, except now we put them back into a violent context after essentially training them to be more organized in terms of gang life. Those things are so deeply woven together that it's really impossible to separate. That's another thing when we talk about the kind of evils of MS-13. We made that problem. We made it, and I wanted to talk more today about the relationship between MS-13 and smuggling. which felt more appropriate to talk about the Arizona stuff in relationship to the exhibition. But I will say that post-2014, you've got all of these deported gang members who have gone to Honduras, who've organized themselves, who have become incredibly violent, and then now are seeing ways to make money off of human smuggling. And so you cannot cross Mexico now without hiring a smuggler who is connected in some way, shape, or form to a criminal organization, a transnational gang like Bloods or Crips or MS-13, and cartels. So that whole thing has become a nightmare now. But you can trace MS-13 from southern Mexico back to Honduras and then to Los Angeles. I mean, those pieces, it starts to get very dizzy when you try to map it all out. But for sure, the things we've done to Central America over the decades have just fueled this current crisis that we're seeing.
Hi. So I think, to see this work, to hear you speak is really important, but also this begs for a call to action, right? And so that's what I want to hear from you is, we have a room full of people that, to a certain extent, have way more privilege than a lot of the folks that are crossing the desert, right? That are having to migrate from countries in Latin America and Central America. What are the action steps that we should be taking, right, as people in positions of privilege to support these folks, right, to change the landscape of, anti-immigrant politics?
My first instinct would be to say, vote, get educated and vote. I'm worried about democracy, though. At the moment, and so I want to believe that it's going to work and that we will right the ship. But I think we have to be educated and we have to hold people accountable. I think that's an important call to action. And of course, there are many groups that you can support, whether it's the Colibri Center for Human Rights that does work to reunite families with the remains of their loved ones. Whether it's the work that we do with the Undocumented Immigration Project to educate the public, to bring programming to Latin America about these issues, to help people tell their own stories, to work with universities and students. There are lots of different organizations that you can connect to, that you can donate to support their work. But I think at the end of the day, all of us need to be more aware so that we can have I think more nuanced conversations about this stuff, and also be aware when politicians try to pull the wool over our eyes, because right now, Trump is coming out and saying, we're going to build this giant wall, we're going to deport all these people, yada yada yada, all these angry, ridiculous kinds of ideas, and then you've got Democrats who are saying things like, we're not going to build this stupid Game of Thrones ice wall that he thinks is going to stop people. We're going to invest in smart technology, in the smart wall. And I would say to those Democrats, I'm coming for you too. Because your smart wall is this thing, right? It's like your smart wall is prevention through deterrence. It's killed thousands of people. And so just because, and it's like you're in a room with an insane person who's saying all kinds of horrible racist things. And as long as you don't say something that extreme, anything you say is seemingly innocuous or reasonable. But I think we have to have enough education to go, you too, Democrats, you need to be held accountable for this. And so I'm hoping that by educating people that they can be smarter voters, but then also, just get out there and read and try to connect with different organizations that are doing this work. It feels really, I feel helpless every day. Like there's nothing that I can do to solve this problem. I feel like I am constantly spinning my wheels. And coming up on this election, I was feeling so frustrated. And it's like, I was like, okay, I'm working on this book about smugglers. I could go hide in my little office at home and write for the next 2 years, and then put a book out in another year and a half. So in 3.5 years, I can finish this book project while the world is on fire. or I can pause all these things and try to find something that's more public-facing, which is why the exhibition has developed, something that at least I feel like today I talk to someone new about this issue, I try to educate some new people about this in hopes that information can then help them to figure out what their next steps are. But I think that we're all looking right now for like what the best call to action is, and I've got. And for me right now, I hope that by doing this public-facing stuff, that's what I'm supposed to be doing right now as a way to encourage action. But I don't know. Sometimes I get really depressed when I think about how tiny I am in the world and just how difficult this problem is. I don't know. Should I throw money at it? Should I throw time and energy at it? Should I burn it all down? Some days I just don't know. But it's an important question to keep asking ourselves.
Thank you so much for your work. I just was wondering, you've talked a lot, like in your other talks, about how the U.S. have kind of now making Mexico and another wall, and is treating it like a desert, that we keep the migrants with all of these policies that you talked about. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about the African migrants that are in Mexico right now, and how does these policies like affect abroad here?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important question because we're dealing with way different demographics than we've ever had to deal with before. Historically, it was young Mexican males, those people between the ages of 16 and 30 that were migrating, and that's for sure not the case anymore. And I think that each one of these new populations of people has to be handled with different types of care. And I don't think Mexico is not doing a very good job of handling any of this. They are taking cues from us, and they're just making lots of money off of this stuff, and people are being highly exploited in all kinds of ways in Mexico. And all I've seen is kind of bad stuff happening to these folks, but differentially. So the exploitation that a Honduran experiences is different from what someone from Cameroon would experience, and it feels like we're only now starting to kind of scratch the surface of how to deal with this. Whether it's folks from Cuba, folks from Haiti. You go to Tijuana now, and it's like you've got a community of Haitians, a community of people from Cameroon that Mexico just doesn't know what to do with. I worked a lot with Afro-Hondurans, Garifuna speakers, who I think their experience is probably more closer to what Haitians and Cameroonians are experiencing, just because they're the direct target of enormous amounts of racism in Mexico. Mexico has a huge racism problem, and I think that those folks are feeling the worst of it, whether they speak Spanish or not. I think they, because they can't hide. Hondurans oftentimes can kind of blend in. I think accent-wise, it can be a little difficult to hide the accent, but at least it's easier to mistake a Honduran for a Mexican, and they can blend in with a crowd. The Garifuna that I work with in Mexico City, they're just like, I've got a target on my back, and there's been very little work done on that. I'm hoping, as this stuff is developing, that there are students looking at these issues, and so I've been working with some students who are looking at deportees from Haiti in Tijuana, and some students who are developing projects with Garifuna in Mexico City. But we know so little about just even the experiences of women migrants. There's been so little work on that, and so then you can imagine the experiences of Haitians in Mexico. There's probably one or two people looking at that right now. We need to do much more work to understand these issues and to figure out how to help people who have very different needs.
Hi. My question is about, like you mentioned previously, the kind of the other policy for the wall is to get into more smart technology and sensing, and other kind of immigration deterrent policies that are brick and mortar wall. And so I'm wondering how this development of sensing technologies and other more like just other ways of trying to catch smugglers and immigrants as they're crossing the border? Like, how is that affecting the the process of smuggling and crossing the border, or it's even kind of just like a misdirected policy and not really affecting it at all?
After the election in 2016, I began working. I went back to Mexico to work with smugglers in Mexico City, and I remember I was sitting in the safe house and we were watching cable news, and Trump was on there talking about how MS-13 thought they were bad, but the U.S. had some real bad hombres who were going to take down all this, these gang stuff, and we were going to make smuggling kind of impossible. And one of my guys, Warlock, he looks at me and he's like, "You believe this stuff?" He's like, "This guy's insane. He has no idea what he's talking about." He's like, "You can't stop this." But he says, "We like it because every time he runs his mouth, we raise our price. But we don't. But it doesn't really affect our work. I mean, smuggling happens, and it's going to continue to happen. It just costs more money now." And so a lot of the smugglers. I mean, there was a moment right after 2016 where the flow had stopped in Mexico City. So a lot of the guys I was with were kind of unemployed, so we just a lot of time to hang out, watch TV, complain, drink beer. And these guys saying, "Well, it's a temporary lull. This thing's going to come back, and when it comes back, I'm going to make a whole lot more money than I did last time." And that's been the case, truly been the case. I mean, you go to Tijuana right now, and this whole idea of you've got to wait for a certain amount of time on the Mexican side before you can apply for asylum. I know dudes that you can pay who will help you to cut in line. Right? They've found ways to cut in line to ask for asylum. So there's always these different kind of opportunities that people can take to make money off of this. And there is no technology that's going to stop this. There's no border fence. There's no smart fence that's going to ever stop this. Because people have to move, and people want to make money off of it. So that's the problem with our approach to human smuggling, is that we think we're going to cut the head off the snake, but it doesn't, just grows a new one. And the way in which human smuggling operates now, it's like you can be with the crew, someone gets arrested within 20 minutes, they've got a new person who's helping to facilitate that movement. And in some ways, it's really shocking to see that you can throw billions of dollars at this problem, and you've got a couple of teenagers who are very savvy about overcoming everything we can throw at them. So we waste a lot of money on border security when we could be investing in infrastructure and other things that would stop people from having to move. But you can't really make a lot of money helping other people. And so that's the problem with the border industrial complex. It's a huge moneymaker for private corporations, for politicians who are investing in this stuff. And so those folks know that. And so they would rather just keep up this idea. I mean, this whole thing about build a wall. There's nobody at the Department of Homeland Security who is saying, "That's a brilliant idea. Why didn't we think about that?" Right? Nobody. I mean, they're basically like, the emperor has no clothes kind of thing. I guess he wants to build this wall, but it's going to be a huge waste of money, and it's not going to work. But that huge waste of money is at the expense of taxpayers, to the benefit of these contractors who are going to make tons of money out of it. So that's kind of the other problem, is that you can't stop it, but we still keep thinking that, and we keep throwing the money at it. And until the American public realizes that too, we're just going to continue to waste our money on this stuff. I mean, yeah, you could slow down human smuggling and migration in all kinds of other ways that would be way more cost efficient, but those are not popular ideas.